Welcome to ESGX Live, our global community for education and information to inspire collaboration and action on all things to do with sustainability, with me, Nigel Lake, here in New York, and my co-host Paul Herman in San Francisco, and today also with Cassandra Kelly, who's joining us as the host for today. With the ever-growing refugee crisis in front of us, we're going to take a look at both what is happening on the ground and I guess what is really needed, what difference we can all make wherever we are. And coming up, I'll hand shortly to Doug Heske for a quick introduction. But before we do, just a few numbers I wanted to share with you. Refugee numbers are growing. These are figures from UNHCR, and they've grown steadily over the last few years, about 7% a year. The big lime-colored bar in the middle is internally displaced people, and a significant number, something like 57% of all these people are still within their own countries. Very often, perhaps all the time, people really would rather stay there than move somewhere else. In total, we're talking about 80 million people, and you can see here the darker colored or the darker shaded countries are where more refugees are coming from. If we look at that by country, then you can see the biggest countries on here are familiar names like Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan. But note also that yellow bar, other countries. There are refugees from many different places around the world. In terms of where those refugees go, the very few that are accepted into host countries where they can resettle, the largest host country is the US, followed by Canada, and again, some other familiar names here. It's also interesting just to look at what does this mean for those countries in terms of the number of refugees accepted per 100,000 of population. And you can see Norway and Sweden at the top of this list. And the numbers for many of these countries are really quite small, just a handful per 100,000 of population. To end my introduction, we're talking about 1% of the entire world's population, and we're talking about 1 in 50 of all children. And of course, Ger Duany, who's with us today, was one of those children. And here's the thing, the proportion of refugees being resettled has declined and is tiny, just 0.1% of the refugees that are under the UN's mandate. So with that, I will hand over to Doug and leave him to introduce the show and pass on to Cassandra.
Great. Nigel, thank you so much. And first and foremost, I'd like to express my gratitude to Paul Herman at Hip Investor and Nigel Lake at Pottinger for really getting behind this such an important issue. Over the course of the past year, we at Newday have been doing a lot of research to better understand the connection between the refugee crisis and climate change. And we do so because as an impact company, we want to assist in directing capital towards organizations that are making a difference, whether they be companies that support the refugee crisis or even nonprofit organizations that are contributing resources to solving the problem. We are also in the process of building an investment strategy in partnership with Refugee Insights, one of our supporting organizations and speakers today, that will allow individuals and institutions to direct investment capital towards this really important cause. Over the past few years, we have learned a lot about what it means to be a refugee, and some of these learnings will be shared today by Ger Duany and others. But it's also important to recognize that there is a human element in all of this. And people sometimes use this term displaced people to describe the crisis. But using this phrase, displaced peoples, almost in a way removes the human element from the experience of refugees. Most refugees don't make a conscious decision to pick up and leave their homeland. They were forced to do so because of persecution, discrimination, violence, or simply the inability to find food, water, and work. It's also important to note that many want nothing more than to stay where they are, but oftentimes that's not possible. Refugees are in part the real consequence of a changing planet. The issue of refugees is so significant, the numbers so staggering, that unless addressed, we will have massive implications for our social structures in the future. The crisis is expected to get worse over the coming decades due to this changing planet. And according to the UNHCR, there are 65.5 million persons forcibly displaced due to conflict, persecution, human rights violations, of which 23 million are refugees and 2.8 million are asylum seekers. It is expected that more than 750 million people could be displaced in coming years due to rising sea levels, food and water shortages, and conflict. And it may be that more than 1 billion children are born into a malnourished environment by 2100. And you can imagine the impact that this has on a global scale. So we're left with this, potentially hundreds of millions of people that will migrate to other regions. Refugee countries that are ill-equipped to handle this level of mass migration. Political tense circumstances in the countries that are refugee receivers. Inadequate integration opportunities supported by not just governments, but also potential employers. And perhaps, and most importantly, a lack of funding on the cause. So joining us this morning and this afternoon are a distinguished group of contributors that are spending their lives addressing the crisis, including Ger Duany, he himself a refugee and former child soldier from the South Sudan. Albino Ga, CEO of the Foundation for Youth Initiative in Juba, South Sudan. Fatoumata Lejeune-Kaba from the UNHCR. Sindhu Janakiram from Refugee Insights, and Mendy Marsh from Voice Amplified. Moderating today's session will be Cassandra Kelly, founder of Sea Change, and recognized for her amazing work as a tech entrepreneur and impact leader. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Cassandra Kelly and this distinguished group of evangelists for the refugee crisis today for today's session on Roads to Refuge.
Thank you, Doug, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining. When I was invited to moderate this discussion, I had to ask myself, why this topic and why now? Because it isn't that when we're not talking, it's not that there isn't discussion in some corners about issues related to refugees, and it's not that there are not climate change dialogues occurring in global debate. But in both cases, it seems to me that the implications and the problems are not getting enough attention in order that we arrive at more lasting solutions. And perhaps more importantly, when you look at climate and refugeeism, we notice that the issues are often discussed separately, and they can't be. If we've learned anything from the past year and a half, surely it includes the fact that we need a better understanding of the interconnectedness of our system, of our people, of nature, of the environment. So today we're going to do just that, and we'll consider the issues facing refugees exacerbated by the changes in climate. What we do know is that the changes in climate that we're already experiencing and the changes that are soon to come will significantly worsen the problems that are being faced by refugees and their host communities. What we don't know is what we're actually going to do about it. Many of us may not feel the immediate impacts in our own lives of those that are forced to leave their homes. Maybe not in our communities. Maybe we don't have many friends who have been impacted. But if we want solutions, it is us that need to insist on them. And so with that in mind, I would love to join to the panel Fatoumata, if you are there, I welcome you, and I think Nigel will bring you on the screen.
Thank you very much, both Doug and Cassandra. You couldn't have set the scene any better than you did.
Well, that's perfect, Fatoumata, because now I'm going to hand it over to you, because from what I've understood from you, there is really quite a bit of misunderstanding around the issue of resettlement, and even a lack of understanding when it comes to why people are forced to leave. I was sitting down yesterday and thinking, is it really that simple? People are forced to leave in drought or to escape war. And with your incredible background, I was hoping that maybe you can set the scene and explain from your perspective what some of the issues are and frankly, why we don't just need to care, but we must care.
Thank you very much again. As you said it, it's not a very easy choice for people to leave their homes. People are attached to their communities, they're attached to their families, their lands. But whenever there is war, they have to flee to save their lives. And from the statistics we have at UNHCR, we find that 9 out of 10 people flee within the region they're from. That's why, for example, you see that more Syrians are staying in the Middle East, the Venezuelans are in other Americas, in the Americas, and the same with African refugees. Secondly, what we're seeing, because you mentioned that the debate is separate, between when we talk about climate and when we talk about refugee issues, actually they're quite interlinked, because we do see that climate affects people differently, whether in Africa or elsewhere, but especially in Africa and Asia, where some countries are mostly affected by floods, monsoon, that displaces them sometimes for short times, others for a long time, depending on the level of destruction. Then you have other regions like the Sahel here in West Africa, where conflict and climate change are completely intertwined, because lack of natural resources, dwindling natural resources because of drought, is fueling community wars. So you have herders on one hand, farmers on the other. Herders need more and more grazing land, but as the land dries up, they can't do that. So they use different geographic areas to feed their animals, and it creates wars. And we're already in a region that's awash with arms because of several civil wars before. So basically, to make a long story short, we have climate change in context of war. So climate change makes it more complex and fuels more conflict. But even if we didn't have conflict, in the long run, climate change will breed conflict. And the other thing is that the larger issue of climate change is that we have to invest better in managing the environment now. That means managing better the forests, managing the lakes, of course, the sea, because if we don't, we're going to have more conflict. And also, we need to invest in peace, peaceful coexistence at a local level, but more importantly, the international community needs to invest in peace. It means not dealing with conflict with only a military response, but also seeing how we could develop, how we could invest in local communities where they don't have enough resources, including water, agriculture, land. And there are many innovations that can help with that. We don't have to wait until we get to the worst case scenario where it's so unlivable that people will continue to move on from rural areas to the urban settings, and who knows, further afield outside of their own regions.
So peacemaking, not just peacekeeping.
Exactly.
Understood. What is it that is it? I guess when we're thinking about the climate change issue, and I feel I'm joined by many who the world was very late to start to have this discussion in any detail and at the right level. Do we throw our hands up in despair? Is it too late?
Well, if it's not too late, it's very pressing. I mean, look at what happens year in, year out. For example, in the region, in West Africa region where I am, and including last year, we had such severe rains and flooding that 700 people became homeless overnight. And mind you that these are people who are already displaced by war, sometimes even more than once. Secondly, we have the example of Lake Chad Basin, where we saw the lake losing 90% of the water and causing people to completely abandon, whereas it was an area where they could do fishing, where there was a lot of trade, it was booming. And today what you have Islamist groups like Boko Haram, taking these territories that are now less populated, because that's a pattern we see, that these armed groups, rebel groups, Islamist jihadists, they prey on communities that are isolated, but these communities are isolated also because they had to leave their areas where they can't make a living anymore. So that's why it's so intertwined. And yes, it's getting late, and we need to invest in governments, and we need to invest in countries so that We can restore state presence. We can make it attractive again for people to go back to the rural areas and have schooling, have all kinds of opportunities for jobs, for agriculture, to feed themselves. But the clock is ticking, I would say.
Thanks very much, Fatoumata. I'm going to come back to you in a moment. I just want to bring on Albino, if I might. Albino, you are on the ground in South Sudan. Can you help us to understand what it is that you're doing there and why you believed it was necessary to create this the initiative?
Hello.
You're still on mute, Albino.
That's the one. Albino,
Is that
welcome.
okay?
Yep, that's perfect. We can hear you loud and clear. So just to restate my question, just wanting to understand, well, thank you very much for joining us. You are on the ground experiencing it and trying to be part of the solution. Just wondering if you might help us to understand, you know, what drove you to be part of the change and is it working?
Thank you so much. We here at the foundation, we are approaching our program in 3 ways. One, we are working with the underserved communities, including the refugees and even the host community. Those communities have very limited access to basic services in their respective area. What we normally do, we promote what we call a private sector development in those areas through social entrepreneurship program. We work with the farmer cooperative, organizing them into the farmer cooperatives, and youth-led enterprise, women association, and all those groups. And what we normally do, we support those groups, you know, to empower their operational capability using the available resources in their area. And with that, we give them the training, we give them the small grant, so that they participate, you know, in producing their own food and supplying the market with their own surplus. So what we are trying to do is the fact that social entrepreneurship program is very important. You know, we have to change the mindset of the people so that they become, more independent. They cannot necessarily depend on maybe on the food aid or maybe on the handout from the goodwill organization that give them the food aid and all this. So we are trying to establish the institution on the ground, institution that responded to the need of the grassroots communities. So that during the time of, for example, like this time of this climate change and all the social unrest, people can be able, to become resilient to their problem, and they can even, respond to their need, without necessarily, being affected by those external shocks. We deal with the youth, and in this part of the country, in this part of Africa, especially in South Sudan, youth become a destabilizing force to the communities. So we are working hard to make these people to become a demographic dividend to their society. That's why we empower the youth-led enterprise, empower the farmer cooperative society, so that even they can participate in the market, supplying the market with their own product, and they can use the available resources to benefit their own communities. That's the one thing that we are now doing. Our aim is to cultivate the hope, resilience, and innovation in Africa, through social entrepreneurship program. Yeah, that's what we are doing.
Hope, resilience, and innovation. I've written those down to remind myself and my children later today. What marvelous words, and what seemingly simple aspiration that is, but how enormously difficult it is at times when there's very little hope. I was wanting to ask Fatoumata, please, if you can just join us, and with your hat on, the effectiveness of initiatives like that Albino were describing, what are you seeing? How do we join in? And maybe Albino, you can also respond to that too, if you don't mind.
Yes, it's very effective to deal with communities and help them organize around the types of skills that they already have, the activities that are right for the environment. Think bringing in the private sector and doing business as opposed to only handing out aid. We've seen it in various parts of operations that we run at UNHCR, whether in Africa or elsewhere, that when you give people a chance and invest in them, they tend to do a lot better and the society benefits at large. UNHCR organized the Global Refugee Forum in December 2019, precisely to draw in people who want to be part of the solution for refugees. So you're asking how you can invest. That's one of the ways. People can invest in refugees, whether they're in urban areas or in the rural regions, and support them with the skills, either to upgrade their skills or acquire new ones in agriculture. It could be also in education. We also even invite people to assist with higher education because not many people who aspire to go to university among refugees have the opportunity to do so. So there are lots of ways: investing in businesses, assisting with education.
Albino, your thoughts on how we can help?
I think the idea is very good, and we're seeing the fact that the refugee or even underserved communities, if they are given opportunities, they can be the dominant force that can bring the change necessary in their own community. And one of the things is to change the mindset, the way they see things. They should not see themselves as, the recipient of assistance. They should be the part and the parcel of those who created the change they need in their community. And the only way to do this is to be done through the entrepreneurship program, changing their mindset, giving them the necessary skill so that they can use the resource available at their disposals for their own good. I think what we need from you is to support some program that really empower the local community, the refugees, and underserved, particularly the youth, the women, so that they can fully participate in their communities and in their local markets.
I can feel Mindy furiously nodding at this point, so I look forward to speaking to her later as we talk about the impact on women and girls, very particularly Albino. So I think she would share your enthusiasm there to make sure that we give adequate support. I'm going to, for the moment, while I'm waiting, we'll hold some questions at the end, I suspect, but I'm going to ask if Ger can join us. Thank you, Fatimata. Thank you, Albino, for your contributions so far. Ger, are you there?
Hello, can you hear me?
I can, and we all can. Thank you so very much. Well, I'm truly not actually sure what I was going to say to you today, having read this, other than thank you. And I'm not, thank you, although I wasn't without a tissue near to hand. All that being said, for those of you who may not have yet read Walking Towards the Rising Sun from Child Soldier to Ambassador of Peace, there's a lot in there that's quite hopeful. When we think of what we want for our children, we might imagine them growing up in relative peace, experiencing joy, getting dirty, eating dirt, jumping in puddles, and if they're really fortunate, being exposed to curious ideas and regular opportunities to learn. And really, this shouldn't be a fairy tale. Unfortunately, as a young boy, you had sorrow, death, and heartbreak as some of your closest neighbors. And yet you remain hopeful or optimistic. I'm not sure what word you would use, but certainly enormously honored to have you on the show today, and hoping that maybe you could share with us a little of your story. I know that 10 minutes isn't much, but I'm sure in those 10 minutes, if we can share your story and perhaps, in that time have some questions around what we can do to help.
Whew. Well,
Good
first,
luck.
thank you so much to all of you guys, and I can't thank you enough. I mean, it is a question of where to begin, because such a conversation that we are having now, of course, is not easy to have. But one thing that I understand through my entire journey is that human drama is inevitable. Why? Well, as a South Sudanese person, or Sudanese, Sudan used to be one of the largest country in the country of Africa, and we were also a British colony. So my life has been conflicted way before independence of Sudan from Egypt, which happened in 1956. So to make a long story short, just like any child, I have the fondest memories of my life in Sudan, where I used to see large gatherings of people, of my people, and ceremonies and warm dance and laughters, and a lot of folktale stories in the midst of civil war. So Cassandra, you can only imagine, there is so much that I have in a sense of memories. But I left my country because everything fell apart. So, and I did all the things necessary for me to survive, living in 4 to 5 different refugee camps in East Africa until I find an opportunity to go to the United States. So when I think about my life, just like any other child that is struggling now in the refugee camps or any part of the world, or have seen a violence somehow, it is the fact that it is difficult to leave your home and live apart from your own people for over 20 years, and then go to another person's country and then go build your life all over again as a teenager. And this is the things that I happen to have. But I left my country with the memories, which is something that led me to even write a book, Walk Toward the Rising Sun, in the form of a memoir. And then I love to share my story with the youth, because I really think they have the strengths and they have visions, and then they are the next generation to tell their own stories in a way where they can really listen to each other and come back and say that, yes, we are the stakeholder of humanity. This is the reason I always keep telling my story, coming back. And I just can't thank you for all of us to get together and talk about these things. So I'm excited.
Thank you. And you did just say something then I was going to ask you, what is it? So there's not terribly many youth, I feel youthful on this call today, but you mentioned very particularly you like to talk to the youth. So the book and the storytelling is it not aimed at, is it not aimed at the elders? Is it actually aimed at the change, the people you think can make the change? Is it to inspire them to what is it that you want to tell the youth?
Oh, well, what I wanted to tell the youth is that, the journey that I've taken myself, I did it at a very young age. And if I really have the strength, if I didn't have the strength as a youth, I don't think I would have been picking myself up from this part of the world and have hopes that one day I will be able to read and write and tell my own story. And this was just hopes for me. So if I didn't have that strength as a young person, then I don't think I would have survived, just like many other people who were a little bit older than me that went to that part of the world and they didn't really have a story to tell. But because we are talking about the refugees today, it's not only just about my story, and I'm not really writing just about war. It's something that the marginalization of the people is something that always bothered me. And for having youth come up when I was a small boy, they say, one day we'll fight this civil war, and once we win this war, and then you guys will build the nation. And this, I was only like 7 until 13. I carried AK-47. I used it so good. And now we became an independent nation in 2011. And again in 2 years, and then we punched the country back into a civil war. And now we lead the world in the refugees, an entire, we're like second or to third, and we are a small number in populations. So I felt like I have the obligation to really tell young people to take responsibility very, very early, because maybe the best that I can do is just to tell my story, because we know each other through stories, the human story.
And so I couldn't agree more. And what, you know, you've got people on the call today that are not the youth, that have had largely relatively incredibly fortunate lives. Is there anything you ask of us that we can do?
Well, so many things that we can do. I mean, I live and based in New York City for the past 17 years, and I grew up in Bloomington, Indiana. I went to high school there. I played basketball there. So I always have homes, many homes all around the world. So the things that I've been doing is always drawing conversation, talking to people, like-minded people, about how we can really bring change, or how to talk to my local authority, or how to talk to a person who could really shift in somehow. And now if we are talking about investing in refugees, then it is our collective responsibility to tell them that, hey, you're not powerless. You're actually a stakeholder of this humanity. And this is what you can do. This is what we can really invest in you in order for you to go and invest in somebody else. Even right now, I really believe if I'm looking for a job, for my next job to act in a movie as an actor, I really believe it's going to be a refugee that really hiring me, because I've seen refugees done things in this world. You know, even this computer that I'm talking to you on right now is because of Steve Jobs, and these are former refugees, come from that background. So we have a history of the refugees around the world that have done great things. So if we can invest in them, it's something that I'm always into.
So if I understood correctly, it's likely that you said the next opportunity for you in the film world would come from another refugee. Did I understand that correctly? Yes. So isn't something that we all need to take away from today, that you don't need to be a refugee to help a refugee?
Definitely, yes, Cassandra.
There are some experiences we don't need to experience in order to imagine or to inform ourselves about and to take action.
Did you ask me a question? Can you rephrase?
Oh, I think that was a statement. I'm just looking in the questions here. Gabriella made a comment. It's very important for us to talk about this in a personal context, like you've been saying, Ger, allowing the clear voice, speaking directly from personal experience. It is overwhelming, but it is important in order to reach the hearts and souls and minds of people, is to make sure that the stories are heard. Otherwise, it's too easy for apathy to set in as we feel a degree of hopelessness. Ger, before I move to Sindhu, and I will come back to you a little bit later, is there anything else you wish you were asked today?
No, I just wanted to say thank you so much, and then I wish we could really continue this conversation, and also try to take, if we can all take a concrete steps, because when you're telling one story, it's not really that easy. But sometimes you really have to go that far, especially when we have to write our own stories. So I encourage people to really write their own stories and share your own stories, and then
inspire others.
Yes.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Fatoumata, for sharing that link in the chat too, with respect to some of the work that Ger does. In fact, Nigel, I might ask Fatoumata to join the screen again, and just, is there a question you have for Ger?
Yes. Listening to Ger
Hi,
is very...
Fatou.
Hi. Listening to Ger is always inspiring. I mean, I follow what he does for UNHCR. And Ger, my question is, would you come to West Africa if I invited you?
Absolutely, tomorrow.
Okay, so we need to discuss
that. Sure.
Beautiful. Thank you very, very much. Well, thank you both. I'm going to give you a little bit of a break and move to Sindhu. Sindhu, welcome to the screen.
Hi, Cassandra. Thanks for having me.
You're super welcome. We were speaking and emailing after, an event, feels like a year ago now. you choose to work in this space because my understanding is you actually believe that solutions can be found, not just that they must be. And on the data side of things, data itself helps us to focus not only on the quantum of a problem, but on where the solutions might lie. And so given that particular belief, if I have that correctly, I was wondering if you could maybe tell us a little bit about what are the benefits, or what is the data telling us about the opportunity of integrating refugees into the economy?
Yeah, thanks, Cassandra, and thanks for everyone for hosting on this incredible panel. And to follow Ger's story, I think specifically is I'm just happy to be a participant in this. I think when it comes to integrating refugees in terms of solutions, we have to start from the perspective of the refugee. And I think what Albino said earlier really resonated in the sense that from his interaction with the youth in South Sudan, one of the goals is to encourage social entrepreneurship, to encourage participation in the market, to encourage people to be better members of their community by being integrated. And one of the ways that refugees can be integrated is economically. And so when it comes to integrating refugees into host countries, once they've been resettled, there's lots of different benefits. So first and foremost, again, from the perspective of the refugee, it improves their stability. Look, being resettled is a huge moment in a refugee's life. It can be discombobulating. It can be very, very disruptive, especially if they're young children. And finding that stability again through a job, through starting a business, through training, that's one of the kind of key benefits, recapturing that livelihood that they've lost. And again, for the community, the next level is for the community. UNHCR says that after 7 years, refugees become what are called net positive contributors. They give more to the community than they take from the community. And that's a really important notion because in resettling refugees into communities in America and Germany and Canada and all these different countries actually helps the community. It helps the fabric of that community. And third and finally, and I think what we're going to be speaking about here for a couple of minutes, is it helps companies. It helps these corporations that are hiring, that are supporting refugees, because it allows them access to a talent pool that they never had before. They never had the abilities of this entire group of people that without specific initiatives to integrate refugees, that talent pool would go unused and unmatched.
And is actually of great interest to me, Sindhu, when you're talking about the opportunity for the corporation. But so that's something that a corporation can receive. They can receive some benefit, receive some value, but there's also some obligation in the world for corporations to be good global citizens. So I was wondering if you can talk to me a little bit about, what role can a corporation play beyond receiving excellent employment and diversity? And are corporations already aware of this? Are they playing their part? And are they set up to do this at any scale?
It's a great question. The answer is that some corporations are starting to understand the growing urgency of the refugee crisis, the fact that to our, the kind of beginning of this conversation, that climate change is this specter that's going to increase the number of refugees. Some corporations absolutely get it, but many don't. And even those that do, there's lots of room for improvement. The problem is that we don't understand what corporations are doing that's beneficial or what is not. And that's where, to the kind of the beginning of your point, understanding the role that corporations can play and their duty to do so. We've seen this movement in the last, let's say, 20 to 30 years for corporations to, whether it's in Europe, have more of a regulatory requirement to report sustainability, whether it's around the world, this requirement to have more equality from a gender perspective. We think that the next movement on that will be support of refugees. As the refugee crisis grows, it'll be incumbent on corporations to act as sort of moral arbiters or moral actors in this kind of world stage to integrate refugees, to support refugees. And there's a lot of room for corporations to improve on that. But the first thing we have to do is to understand what they're doing right and what they're not doing. And that's what our company is trying to do, and what other players in the field are trying to do as well, is understand what is working and what is not.
I'm going to give you a choice of questions here, Sindhu.
Sure.
Who is doing it well is one option. Or maybe a more tricky one would be, why do they need to be net positive? Why can't they just be net neutral?
I think the second question is maybe more interesting. There are, just to kind of talk about the first question, there are many different activities that corporations are doing to support refugees. Starbucks has a program to hire 10,000 of them by the end of next year. Generali has a program to help refugees start 500 new businesses. There's all these different examples, and at the macro level, understanding how that supports refugees in the aggregate and using that insight to drive further change and drive more resources and capital towards refugee initiatives is ultimately our mission, and I think the mission of everyone on this panel. Why net positive contributors? Because, well, two things. One, imagine, from an empathy perspective, you're in their shoes. I think everyone wants to have that dignity and that livelihood, embrace improving their own livelihood. They want the ability to provide for their family. They want their children to go to a good school, and so, just from an empathy perspective, it's important to understand how being a net positive contributor, if we're going to use that phrase, is beneficial to everyone. But it also just helps the local community. As I said before, it really improves the bonds between people. We've seen in Canada and parts of America, in Europe, this massive acceptance of refugees and attempt to integrate them into their local communities. And the world, I think, is a better place for it when we integrate refugees successfully.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, for some of us, the darker side of refugee resettlement, both for the individual and for the communities that may not be prepared for the influx of new arrivals, that can be challenging. But many of us, whether it's through cuisine, the most obvious thing, cuisine and clothing and textiles, and that's at the most basic, even if we haven't thought it through, have been huge beneficiaries of a diversity of culture. And that's just picking at something very obvious. So yes, I do hope that we can be more embracing and of the positive contribution and the benefits. And we are so fortunate to have through welcoming other people to join us wherever we might live. So thank you. I'm going to ask Mendy to join the screen now. Mendy.
Hi.
I'm super glad to be joined by you, both a lovely and dear friend and someone who I admire greatly for the work that you continue to do around another area that is dear to my heart, women and girls. So it was brought up a little bit earlier, and you have educated me that climate change does, perhaps unsurprisingly, have a disproportionate negative impact on women and girls. But I was wondering if you might share with us why this is and what can we do about it? Is it really as simple as just letting the women and the girls lead? Mendy, over to you.
Thanks, Cassandra. It's really great to be with you and with this great panel. Yeah, I hate to say it, but it is really, in many ways, that simple. So I'm going to walk you through how I see it being that way. And I totally agree. We know that women and girls tend to be more vulnerable to the effects of climate change due to a range of issues. We know that the climate change has the greatest impact on the world's poor, and women and girls make up the bulk of the world's poor. It's really that basic. Women and girls are particularly dependent on biomass like ag crops, wood, and forest resources. I've walked with many women and girls who have to spend, between 2 hours to 20 hours a week carrying water, carrying huge loads of firewood. Girls as younger than 7 who have to spend so much time doing this. We know that this has really negative consequences on their health in a range of ways. We know that women and girls have limited access to basic rights like education, sanitation, and even the ability to own their own land or even just to move freely. And we know this is linked to climate change. We know that as women and girls have to walk further and further to access what are dwindling water and fuel resources, girls spend less time in school or they drop out altogether. Women are almost 43% of the world's agricultural workforce. However, in many countries, women can't even own land, or they have really tremendous challenges in even accessing credit, receiving loans. You know, we also know that research shows that environmental triggers make communities more desperate to find natural resources, and the prevalence of groups in these situations mean that human traffickers and others start preying on women and girls, exposing them to a range of different forms of violence. You know, ultimately, the more women and girls struggle to survive, the less likely they are to engage in political and civic activity. And we know that this has really negative consequences for everyone. We have to really recognize that any effective climate resilience or adaptation intervention has to go beyond really recognizing women and girls as victims. We need to acknowledge that women and girls are integral to as partners in climate change. Women and girls have traditionally always been the stewards of their environments, and we really need to, acknowledge the skills and knowledge that they hold, and make sure that they can actually help us design interventions that they know will work. The organization that I lead knows that women and girls and the organizations that they lead on the forefront are really the ones who are engaging in climate risk mitigation. They're engaged in disaster response, and they're coming up with incredible solutions daily. But often these systems that come in to support refugees and other displaced persons don't recognize this knowledge and expertise. We need to make sure that funds actually flow to these organizations that are really working on behalf of women and girls. Recent research that Voice has done has really shown how the pandemic has further exacerbated the impacts of climate change on women's burdens of work, making it harder for them to access the resources that they need. And these organizations that we work with really tell us that there's so many limitations in the way that resources actually flow through humanitarian response systems. And they tell us that they need access to donors to be able to really build relationships. They need to be able to access the halls of power and be part of the decision making. They can no longer just be afterthoughts. And women and girls not only are they integral to climate change adaptation and mitigation strategies, as Sindhu has said, we know that when they are given the platforms that they need, we can see changes on a positive front around within corporations. I mean, at a basic level, we know that in countries with higher numbers of women in parliament, they're more likely to ratify environmental legislation. The presence of women on boards of companies often correlates with more investments in renewable power and improved energy efficiency. When women are in charge of power around water resources and have a say in how water is allocated and distributed, there tend to be fewer water-related instances of conflict. And this is a major thing that Fatimata has noted. When women have access to buying and cultivating their own land, they're also more likely to use sustainable agricultural practices. And people need to know this because women are, they're really on the front lines of change making, but still, sadly, they're excluded from the decision-making process. They are not supported in the way that would uphold their lived experience and the knowledge and expertise that they have. But we know at Voice and with other, ally organizations that we work with, women and girls are central to slowing down what is hopefully going to be a reversing of the impact of climate change. And what I'm saying maybe doesn't sound revolutionary, but if in fact we just listened and we responded accordingly to what they tell us, there would be a seismic shift. The shift would challenge the patriarchy that is inherent in the international aid system that indirectly devalues the voices of women and girls. So if you ask me what we can do, because I know you've been asking folks this, Cassandra, we can listen to women and girls, let them lead, fund them directly in less cumbersome systems, ways that are based on trusting their knowledge and expertise, their knowledge and understanding of their communities, the challenges that they uniquely face because they're women and girls, the pressing needs that they express are the ones that need to be taken on front and foremost. And this will allow us to make real change. And on a basic level, we all can be role models.
And Mandy, where do you say we need to listen? But where do we go to listen?
Where do we go to listen? I mean, I think we listen in our communities. I think if we are not, it can be as basic as going to a community meeting, even though I know we haven't had a lot of those over the last year. If women and girls are not given space to be heard, say something about it. Make space for them. Make sure that, your friend Alice on the other side of the table can be heard because she has knowledge and expertise, right? We know that when we welcome refugees and displaced populations into our communities, as other panelists have said, our communities grow more powerful, more resilient. But if the voices of women and girls are not incorporated into those other voices that are being heard, we're not going to have the change that we really need to make. And I think that we underestimate the role model aspect of this, right? The more we can have other people observe us doing the right thing, the more likely that other people are going to stand up behind us and with us and help get the whole range of voices heard that need to be heard. And that includes women and girls.
Look, I couldn't agree more, Mandy, and it's so important. Thank you for the comments that are going on in the chat too. Please, if you can have a little look at those, some of the questions are being asked. Fatimata is responding kindly. Thank you very much. I'm going to ask all panelists now to join me here so we can all be together. That should be about 6 of us in total. Sindhu, welcome. Just reminding you to turn on your videos and at the right time, turn on your audio. So I know that it's coming to the time where we start to wrap things up. And as we've gone through, you have helpfully told us some of the things that you want us to do. Ger, I'm just going to give people a quick moment. Is there anyone on the panel that wanted to say, apart from obviously Fatimata has made a big ask for Ger, is there anything that you wanted to say to him before he has to leave us? Just unmute.
No, I just want to say thank you so much for briefing us. I mean, the data can speak for themselves, and I really appreciate that. So I've always been part of the UNHCR family, and it's good to have you here. Thanks.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And just to recap, I'm going to start with Fatimata. What must we, listening to this call, on this call, what can we do? You're good on mute.
I think when it comes to refugees and solving refugee problems, the best we can do is think long-term, think opportunities, think investments, because they're human beings, sorry, like you and me. They aspire to the same things, education for the children, opportunities to have a job, to create enterprises. And we have very many successful people like Ger, for example, that have gone through many things but are successful because they have been given an opportunity. So I'm asking everybody to help whenever. When I say help, not in the sense of handout, but be part of the solution at a bigger scale. Look at refugees as people you can invest in.
Sindhu.
Yeah, just picking up right off of what Fatimata said, that refugees are people you can invest in. I think there's just two things. One, directly as a call to action, give to organizations. I think that we're gonna produce a list here of refugee-led organizations and refugee-led businesses, especially. Give to those organizations. Donate to organizations such as Kiva that are providing small business loans to refugee-led startups. The work that we're doing in terms of macro and corporations, I think also there's a more subtle thing that people can be doing, which is just in whatever company that they work at, if it happens to be a multinational corporation, be the voice inside of your company or your organization that pushes for your company to care about refugees. Again, we've already extolled all the benefits to the community, to corporations, of course, to refugees themselves. But oftentimes, the initiatives that start within a company to fight for gender equality, to fight for a more sustainable company, we want more of those kind of changes happening when it comes to supporting refugees, and not in a philanthropic way, although that is very, very important, in a way that provides the refugee with a job, in a way that provides a refugee with a small business loan to help them start their business, in a way that provides a refugee with the skills training, the upskilling, the education that they need. Every person that is in some of these companies, that some of them might be attending right now, they can be that kind of change agent within their organization to push their company to do more to solve this crisis.
Thank you. Albino, if you're there.
Thank you so much. What I would like to say is that we need to invest on refugees, particularly the women, the youth, and the population in general. We need to create, a situation that will give them the meanings, like empowering them, in the area of business and then also vocational training, giving them the necessary skill that will take them to the labor markets. And all this can be done through the social entrepreneurship program, where they can create, the meaning for themselves. They can even change their mindset, the way they build themselves as the recipient of their handout, but they can also, see themselves as the solution to their own problem. I think that is the best way to do that. And I hope we can see a positive outcome if we really try to support the refugee through such investment portfolio. Yeah.
So Mandy, what I'm hearing is if we want to help, we need to be very cognizant that the help isn't something that gets given to people when they arrive near to us. It's help given so that at best, opportunities that they can stay where they want to stay in their homes, but where they are forced to leave, that we give enough advanced thought to and contribute in our own ways to providing the assistance and the opportunity wherever they need to resettle or wherever they need to move to. Is there anything you wanted to add to that, Mandy, from my understanding?
Yeah, no, totally agree with all of that, Cassandra. I mean, I think there's a role that we can play, as Sindhu and others have said, inside of big institutions, inside of corporations. I think that, there's so many corporations that if they actually came up with creative ways to listen and learn from women and girls, they would end up they would have their factories and other things, and they would set them up in ways that is not going to actually put women and girls at increased risk. So there's so many different things that could be accomplished if we actually really did listen to women and girls, if we are welcoming refugees into our communities. Women and girls often know who is most at risk. So listen to them. They can have positive impacts for other women and girls inside that community. There's so many different ways that if we allow their lived experiences, knowledge, expertise to be learned from, that we would make so many different kinds of positive changes for communities all over the world.
Mandy, and thank you. And I'm going to wrap it up now and thank you all. It is hard to be what you cannot see. Not my quote, as you all know, Ger. So thank you for being somebody that people can look to, that youth can see, that adults can look to as a role model, as a hopeful story, as a relative success story. We do need more of those. And I think at the very basics, what we can do on this call is try to make sure that there are more positive stories like yours, Ger. I feel like there's one more thing you might like to say. I'll say thank you, and we'll move on to back to you, Nigel or Doug, after Ger.
I just wanted to say something real quick. I mean, I like what Mandy's really saying, that we have to give each other room to listen and observe, and also say less. I think if we can identify with something bigger than just we are women and we are girls and we are boys and we are men, and we can just identify with something called humanity, because humanity is built on the backbones of everybody, and this movement that we try to create here to really be the stakeholder of what we are doing, you need all of us. you know, and then we need all of us to listen to each other. So I really appreciate everything you are saying, Mandy. And yeah, everybody should be given an opportunity to be listened to. Thank you.
Well, thank you all so much. I think those words from Ger at the end, humanity is built on the backbone of everybody, is an incredibly important thing to keep in mind. Just reflecting briefly on the discussion, you know, one of the big lessons here is there is a huge amount that can be done effectively by tackling all of these problems as far as possible at the source, to invest in peace, which is also about investing in creating economic opportunity and creating economic inclusion on the ground in the countries that are under stress. It's about listening to and supporting and empowering refugees, including women who are refugees, providing resources that can help, again, create employment, create businesses, create opportunities, and allowing those organizations that are closest to the challenges and closest perhaps to the opportunities to help bring that to life. Of course, there's plenty we can do here ourselves if we're in the West or in developed countries where these, you know, we are hosts to refugees. As an employer, hire refugees. There are wonderful examples of what they've achieved. Also, as an employer, look at your supply chain and where you're purchasing from. Do more to include refugee-owned businesses, both domestically and perhaps internationally in your supply chains too. As an employee, push your HR department to hire more refugees. And as an individual, there's clearly lots we can do to support the organizations that are doing great work, both here and on the ground, particularly refugee-led businesses, refugee-led organizations. And also I put in a word for advocating for the cause of refugees too. It's notable in recent times that funding from major governments for international aid has been declining. And it's easy for politicians to play this game. We need to make it harder for them by advocating for that. So I will end by saying thank you sincerely to our guests from Africa today, Fatoumata, Ger, and Albino. It's been a wonderful conversation. Also, those of us closer, those panelists closer to home, Mendy, Sindhu, and Cassandra, who stimulated once again a really wonderful conversation. And I will hand to Paul Herman briefly just to give us a quick update on what's coming up.
Great. Thank you, Nigel. And thank you, everybody, for joining today. Really appreciate your deep dive into focusing on action. And Cassandra, thanks for curating the conversation about what we can do. More exciting ESGX episodes are on the way. So later today, US time, there's Green Your Retirement. So Megan Morris, of Values Advisor, will lead the conversation, joined by Caitlin Crittel, Timothy Yee of Green Retirement, Rob Thomas of Social K, and Jim Roach of Natixis. So please join us at 2 p.m. Pacific, 5 p.m. Eastern for that. As always, ESGXs will be recorded and available afterwards as well. So you can share them with your family, with your colleagues, with your board of directors, and with your networks. Following that, next week we have the Green Jobs Report, the monthly Green Jobs Report. This will be a deep dive into energy, specifically oil and gas energy, and an even deeper dive into something called the Fossil Fuel Non-Proliferation Treaty. And so our guests will, including Mark Campanale, will dive deeper into that. So please join us for that. This is you may be familiar with the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. This is a push to have a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty to accelerate the move towards renewable energy. And then wrapping up the month, we'll have a focus on Black Wall Street and investing for economic inclusion. And Doug Heske of Newday Impact is curating this. And so we'll have a focus on not only memorializing and the Black Wall Street Massacre in Tulsa, Oklahoma from 100 years ago, but importantly focusing on action and investing going forward. So thanks again for joining ESGX. Feel free to share this episode, and we look forward to seeing you next time on ESGX.